Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Wellness Masterclass with Beth McGroarty, entitled Wellness Trends Get Real, What Matters and Why in 2021, with our wise and wonderful Beth McGroarty, and more about Beth in just a few minutes. Thank you, Beatrice. I'm Nancy Davis, Chief Creative Officer and Executive Director of both the Global Wellness Summit and Global Wellness Institute, and I'll be your host for today's call. I want to thank Amir Alroy and Galit Kulvitz, co-founders of WellTech One, and our generous sponsors for this Wellness Masterclass. This is the first year we are having these calls sponsored, and as long as we have generous supporters like WellTech One, you'll all continue to enjoy these events without cost. So, Toda Robah. I'm practicing my Hebrew for the fall. I will be asking Amir to comment a little bit later in the call. Before introducing Beth, I want to introduce Susie Ellis, Chair and CEO of both the Global Wellness Summit and Global Wellness Institute. In addition to everything she is, Susie is also the Wellness Trends champion. For well over 15 years, Susie has worked closely with Beth to contribute her ideas and insights as the report takes shape. Susie?
Thank you, Nancy. And I will give you as much time as possible with Beth. I just have so much respect for her. And all of you who are on this call are in for a treat because Beth has amazing pulse. And it's just been a treat to work with her. I think we've been working together, 15 years or even more. So thank you for the introduction, Nancy. And I'm so excited to hear what Beth has to say today.
Thank you so much, Susie. Also on the call are other members of our team, Beatrice, whom you all know by now, Michelle Gamble, Wendy Jackson, Paulina Trays, Cassandra Cavanaugh, likely others. It takes a village, and we have the very best team. Just a quick refresher on Zoom, because most of you now are very familiar with Zoom meetings. I'll just remind you, Beatrice is going to keep everybody muted to eliminate the background noise, that you can view this call in the speaker view or gallery view. At the top right of your Zoom window, you can make that choice. And please use the chat function, as you already are, to let us know where you are and to say hello, but also to ask a question of Beth. I'll do my best to be looking at that and pulling your questions in, but rest assured that after the event, Beth will answer questions that got unanswered, and we'll send that along to you in your follow-up. So thanks so much for your cooperation. Now it's my very special and unique pleasure to introduce my colleague and dear friend, Beth McGroarty, VP for Research and Forecasting at both the Global Wellness Summit and Global Wellness Institute. I have often referred to Beth as the brain trust when it comes to wellness trends. Her vast knowledge extends well beyond most trend spotters. Beth brings to her work a rigorous, academic, almost archaeological understanding of the world of wellness and its place in our lives. She is as funny as she is smart, wise beyond her years, and she is the go-to person for global media when they have questions about anything related to this industry. Beth is generous with her time and her scholarship, sharing her thinking and deep insights with all who call. And while this sometimes makes those of us who are trying to meet deadlines a little crazy, it's not an overstatement to say that Beth has helped shape the wellness industry with her knowledge, her passion for truth and evidence, her high standards, her brilliant writing, and her willingness to go against the prevailing winds, as she did this year when tackling the subject of immunity. It is this very approach to her work that has made the global wellness trends that we produce the gold standard in the industry. Beth also writes the bi-weekly Trendium, which is a publication of the Global Wellness Summit, as well as The Brief, which comes from the Global Wellness Institute. Beth has influence over the research we do, the positions we take, the thinking we offer the world, which is why when most people think of Beth, they think of her remarkable brain. I also think of her equally huge and flourishing heart. Beth has friendships that span decades, close relationships with children in her life, from nieces and nephews to children and grandchildren of friends. I know this personally. All of whom call her lovingly and by her own design, anti-Beth. She is warm and loving and truly the person you'd have at your dinner party. I think of the legendary roundtables with the likes of Dorothy Parker at the Algonquin, storied salons in Bloomsbury, and I think Beth would hold her own with the best of them. She is a great thinker. It's a rare and wondrous thing. She is a treasure. We all love her. And it's a real treat to have her with us today to unpack the most recent Global Wellness Trends report. Now, Beth lives in Los Angeles and is a notorious night owl, so I have to give her special props for getting up early and being with us today. The one and only Beth McGroarty. Now, Beth, you have to unmute bottom left of your screen.
Nancy.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Beth, we are so thrilled to have you. Now, we have just launched last week the trends report. So my question to you to start is, do you suffer postpartum after something like that? Or is it more like PTSD? And you can be honest, you're among friends.
It's an absolutely huge undertaking. I decided I was immunocompromised after writing the immunity trend, after reading about 500 medical articles. But I mean, I think that's one thing we try to do, and there's a sea of trends reports now, dozens, is to go pretty deep with doctors and evidence, because it's critical for the wellness industry and its reputation. And actually things that are on the table this year aren't, it's not quite as lighthearted. There's a public health crisis, there's serious mental problems. So I think that there's a kind of urgency for, what I call in the report, a kind of get real, a little bit more of a get real attitude that we need to take in the wellness world this year. But yes,
Yeah.
at the end, you always think, I wish I could have done this other trend, but yeah, it's 100 pages. It's a major undertaking.
And so, you just touched on, sort of what's going to matter. The focus, particularly now on science and evidence and authenticity and all of this really taking hold. What is your gut feeling about what is going to matter?
Well, if you take a big picture look, I mean, I just feel like that if you think about where wellness, or what the perception of the wellness industry was in 2019, there's been a seismic change in people's perception. So, I mean, I think everyone knows on this call that the traumas of 2020, the pandemic, economic challenges, racial injustice, especially in the United States, political nightmare. I mean, they've just created, within 1 year, the value of wellness has skyrocketed. It's a huge value for people now. It's a bigger share of their wallet than it was, even if the wallet is smaller. I think we also know, I mean, there's just so much going on. So COVID itself, exposed, they call it underlying conditions now, we call it chronic diseases. It exposed the cost, the human cost, the death, the sickness of an industry where healthcare and wellness are not integrated. So that's one of our trends this year, is a new convergence that has to happen between healthcare and wellness. So, I mean, wellness is really, I think, probably in all of its modern history, 15, 20 years, it's really at a watershed moment. It's a really important moment. The opportunities are huge. I mean, we say in the wellness and healthcare, this is a second medical renaissance. If the first one was from 1400 to 1700, we're really at the cusp of a moment where the preventative wellness concepts and healthcare really have to come together and learn from each other. So wellness needs to lean harder into science. It needs to lean harder into evidence to be part of at the healthcare table. And then we're seeing at the same time healthcare, wellness is, as we call it, the cool kid on the block in that trend. Needing to not only open up to more preventative approaches, but to sort of change its image in many ways and become more aspirational and less sterile and less terrible. So I think that one of the first things we see going into the future is a new kind of connection, conversation, collaboration between wellness and medicine. On the other hand, I really feel that something happened the minute the pandemic hit, which is that that wellness industry that had become so associated with elites and the rich and the white and sometimes silly solutions or evidence-free or hyper trendy, that fast fashion mechanism that dominates the wellness world, all of a sudden felt tone deaf. I mean, it's a vibe I feel, but it's more than a vibe. It's something I hear people talking about. It just isn't, it doesn't resonate. So I feel that there's a new aspirational vibe. Wellness matters more, but there's a bigger vibe for sort of not just back to basics, but evidence grounded solutions. So a real tone shift in what matters.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see, and also because of the elitism, I mean, this is, the bashing was happening way before the pandemic, but now wellness is so much more important that the future really will, I think, people are working on solutions, concepts that make it more inclusive, more accessible, more affordable. This is what we see in our entertainment industry trend, in our breathwork trend, in our bringing color to wellness trend. I mean, that's a theme that runs through all of our trends this year, as well as evidence-based. So what the wellness industry leading with the wrong things in the immune space and needing to correct that and move from, all the immune boosting to some serious immune modulation and balancing. So on the other hand, I think we I don't want to overstate this idea of an inclusive, accessible, affordable. That's going to be a huge thing. I do think the pandemic is unfortunately, as every economist will tell you, is exacerbating income inequality. And so the sort of elites are getting wealthier and the rest of us are not. So I do see there's going to be a huge market for even more expensive wellness that serves sort of more elite populations. But what's going to expand is the desire for the 97% of us that aren't there. So
And the focus on that kind of inclusivity. I mean, I think, you did, one of the trends that you wrote is about Hollywood, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But, you touched on this sort of, the celebrity and all those things seeming tone deaf. I mean, a lot of that seems to have disappeared right now from, the popular view. I mean, I no longer see all of those celebrities pushing products and things jumping into that the way they had before this pandemic. Do you see a shift there?
Well, it's a big part of the trend as far as Hollywood comes to wellness is there's never been more celebrities associating themselves with wellness. I mean, they're founders, investors, they're taking executive. I mean, it's so many celebrities are taking a position in the wellness industry that you really can't understand the investment space without them now. I would say that what's really different is that, they used to be sort of pretty face spokesmodels, and what they're really doing now is they're rebranding themselves
Right.
around wellness because they need a positive, purposeful brand. And they're doing some very meaningful and getting involved in categories, whether it's sexual health and wellness for women or bringing more mental wellness to Black and Brown communities. They're kind of rebranding in a way that's more meaningful than in the past. But I feel that 2019 kind of wellness industry that we knew is in the back mirror now. Yes.
Right. And and purpose and science playing a much, much bigger role. Before we get into the specific trends in the report, which we are just about to do, tell us a little bit about your process, Beth, when you are evaluating, when you're looking at the year and you're thinking what this report is going to be and what trends are of interest to you. What do you do? Because this report is so special, and it is because of your influence on it. Give us a little inside look at the McGroarty process for trends.
Oh, yeah, it's such an elaborate process. I mean, every year, as Susie said, we've been working on these trends reports for 15 years. And every year I think there's no more wellness trends. We've done them all, or somebody's done them all. But that's not true, because this is such a fast moving market. There's so much consumer desire. So we try to balance the sort of fast fashion mechanism with like what actually is meaningful. The whole idea of trends is frustrating. there's no annual expiration date on mental wellness or, I mean, so it's a frustrating in that way. But, I think I work with the Global Wellness Institute and Summit. We just, I think the most important thing is we have an incredible global network. So I have access to executives across every sector, doctors, investors, futurists. We have incredible boards. I talk to people all year long. You got to talk to people. Obviously, trends that we're spotting shape the content that you put into the summit every year. I mean, on a personal note, I talk to the press every day. That really helps because they're, in the middle of what's breaking. I believe in reading for 2 hours every day on the space. I do it every morning and every night. I create a giant document of links, like 40 pages, and that's a document that lives all year long. And Susie and our team, obviously, we have dozens on the table, and we go through a winnowing process of which ones win the trends this year. So, and then we hire incredible researchers and writers that we did this year to sort of bring them to life. I think the thing for me that really is what makes the trends valuable is to think outside the wellness space. So I really want to know what, and we have a lot of resources. What are the big economic, demographic, cultural, and technological shifts that are happening? Because that predicts what people will desire most in wellness or need most. I mean, so, I've said it before, when the smartphone appeared in 2008, the whole industry shifted towards mental wellness. Our brains were fried, our human life and psyches were changed. So you see everything from the rise in meditation to cannabis and CBD. Now we're at a point where the mental wellness crisis is intense, and the kind of desires we'll see next year are really like, I want a total brain reset. So we see psilocybin rising, and we see people doing, really intense things like wild swimming. So I think you see these shifts, like religion declined, traditional religion declined. Now wellness is now filling that spirituality space for like hundreds of millions of people. So that soul space was empty, and wellness has stepped in there. You see planet destruction. So we see an almost obsessional and elegiac obsession with nature as it disappears. So, I mean, these big cultural shifts, like for instance, going into the pandemic, the big demographic shift is women not marrying or marrying late, not having children, more solo people. This is a huge demographic shift. And so the biggest trend we saw going into the pandemic was social wellness, more communities, more social. That was put on hold because of distancing, but that's a force that will re-erupt as soon as we can meet again. That didn't go anywhere. So I think you need to think about, big picture shifts that are happening over a long period of time, the loneliness epidemic, so to see where people are going to have fervent needs that need to be met within wellness.
There's a bunch of comments and questions having to do with nature being, such an important piece of the puzzle this year. And of course, we've done nature trends before, trends that, forest bathing and other things. You want to just touch on nature for a minute? Because that's a very popular thing in the chat right now.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it a fetishization, but it's almost as, obviously the benefits, the medical benefits for time in nature are just, constantly coming out. It's real. It is a mental and physical therapy, wellness therapy. I think the ache for nature, obviously it was also part of the distancing that we've had since the pandemic. It's the one place you could be safely. It defined wellness travel. It will define wellness travel, when we come back to traveling. But I think that it's almost psychic, this desire, and I can't help but feel that it represents a kind of elegiac feeling. In other words, we are in a serious climate and a natural crisis, and there's a lot of emotion around nature.
Yeah. Okay, Beatrice, would you just show the trend report for a moment? I just want everybody to be sure they see. This is the cover of the new trends report that was just released, and We are selling it this year on our website, along with videos of the authors talking about their trends, which was really great and part of the presentation. We touch on many, many things in this report, and we'll go over those in a minute. Thank you, Beatrice. So Beth, in addition to being kind of the editorial director of the report, you wrote two, I think Susie would call megatrends, two really, really important deep dives into two topics. You touched on this before, and I touched on the other. Your two trends, Hollywood and the entertainment industry's jump into wellness, and the other is the future of immune health. Stop boosting, start balancing. Now, this is where you went a little bit against the grain, and I think that's really important to point out. I think immunity, in addition to pivot, was probably the word of 2020. Can you give us some thoughts about the immunity? Tell us about that trend and why you went where you went with it.
Okay. Well, Susie, you wanted to address the future of immunity. So I talked to doctors and I read a lot of medical research. So, I mean, I think as we all know, we got blitzed with not just the terminology of immune boosting, you know, supplements, superfoods, therapies, you know, these kind of quick fix, kind of false hope, promise. And after talking to doctors, I mean, it's just, you cannot boost the immune system. There's no, this is unscientific. And also the exact opposite last thing you want to do is boost the immune system, because that creates a hyperactive immune system, which then attacks itself, which is what we saw in COVID when people's bodies attacked themselves back, or in autoimmune diseases. And, you know, it was so fascinating to me. I mean, obviously the pillars, so we're moving, you know, so the point of the trend is, I mean, you know, and I say in the trend, it sort of fascinates me, how did the wellness world, which started as an alternative to big pharma, somehow become an industry that looks like it, with so many prescription bottles and syringes and IV drips? How did we become a sort of big pharma simulating industry? You know, so much ingestible wellness. But anyway, so this, from talking to the doctors, the boosting was just the wrong way to go. And I think the thing that fascinated me the most, just the mounting evidence, and I'm seeing it every day, is, you know, obviously pillars of sleep, stress reduction. These are crucial to immune modulation, immune balancing, which is what we want. But what's really coming to the fore, and COVID accelerated this knowledge as well as new medical research, is that we need to focus on metabolic health, and the microbiome is looming like really huge, and personalized nutrition. And these three things, these elements, this is a diet crisis. These things are all integrated, but these have to become far more important if you want to deal with the, you know, immune health and the public health at a big level. The microbiome research is so fascinating that's coming out. There's a new study by a global research organization, very, you know, Harvard, et cetera, called PREDICT. And they just did studies on the microbiome that are just so fascinating. So, you know, twins like Susie and her sister, genetics do not have a big impact on the microbiome. Twins only share 34% of their microbiota, whereas you and Nancy and me, we share 30%. And the impact that COVID showed, that bad microbiota, that a bad gut health was directly related to infection and seriousness and death. You know, and at the end of the study, I say the medical institution is going to focus a lot more on microbiome research. They've gotten the memo. And then this week, what comes out, amazing. The NIH just funded the largest study on precision nutrition and the microbiome in history, $156 million, 5 years. They're going to study 10,000 people for 5 years about how they process food and how food has a specific impact on the microbes in that person's gut and how that relates to disease and immunity. And they say it's going to transform the field of nutrition science. This is where everything's going. The more you read, the more you realize, because 70% of our immune system is in our gut, which is hundreds of millions of cells, a very complicated system. But you're going to diet, metabolic health, the microbiome, And then because every food impacts a person's microbiome and system differently, it makes personalized nutrition absolutely critical to the future. And there's all kinds of startups and things, and microbiome testing is still in its infancy, but there's some big people getting into this. And I was just so surprised that the kind of pillars, the change makers, really were the microbiome, metabolic health, and personalized nutrition.
Yeah, we have, there's a masterclass coming up in 2 weeks with Dr. Frank Lipman, and it's about the microbiome. And I know that you talked to him, at one of the experts that you talk about that you talk to for your trend. Talk a little bit about when you spoke to these people, did they kind of agree with you? Did they push against you? Because a lot of them are involved in immune boosting products, or, concoctions and all kinds of things.
It was so interesting. They come from different places. Dr. Frank Lipman, very famous functional medicine doctor, and Dr. Ken Pelletier, who I really leaned on these guys for immune science and immune health. The amazing thing is they both agreed on metabolic health, the microbiome, and personalized nutrition. I was like, score. I would say that I think the supplements issue in medicine and wellness is a minefield. So I'm not, we have a whole section on supplements and superfoods and immune boosting superfoods. We're not throwing them out. We're moving them down the chain. They're just not as important as the things we need to move up the chain. I would say Dr. Littman, is more bullish on supplements, and Dr. Pelletier probably a little bit less so. But I was, it's quite amazing when agreement.
Yeah, Beth, your background is not the sciences, right? You were literature. Is that correct? Just correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Is it your background?
Yeah.
So every year you self-educate in these incredible topics, deeply, deeply immersed, so that you can provide to all of us, access, a way into understanding these things. It's an incredible, that's why I described it as almost archaeological. I mean, the process of understanding it well enough to then present it is really quite incredible. And I have to give you, a great deal of credit for being able to bring those topics to the rest of us in a way that we can understand it, make sense in our lives, and to kind of unpack what the doctors are saying and, varying voices are saying. How hard is that for you when you're in the middle of it and you're talking to these people?
Yeah, well, I'm not a medical doctor. That's why we lean it's an important part of our network, and we lean so heavily. We're not, it's not like we only rely on traditional medicine experts, obviously, but when you deal with something as serious as immune health, and it's a public health crisis, we felt that there was a disconnect between what the wellness industry was leading with and what they should be leading with. And that's the new convergence between medicine and wellness. They have to talk. Wellness has got a lot to teach doctors. Doctors have a lot to teach science and medicine. So yeah, in a case like that, it is not fun to read 400 medical studies. But at the end of it, you're like, I'm an immunologist now. So
or you play one on TV.
Yeah.
And speaking of entertainment, Hollywell was your other trend. Hollywood and the entertainment industry jumping into wellness. Okay, what's your vision? What are we going to be watching on Netflix? What's your vision of what's happening in that world?
Yeah, this is a really interesting space, and you kind of wonder, why hasn't Hollywood come harder earlier? Well, now they are. And this trend is all about how wellness is really shaking up and will shake up television and the music industry. I could have got into gaming, but I didn't have time. But there's a whole new kind of wellness TV being born. And then, when we think of TV, we think of lying on the couch and it being passive, but this is about experiences and wellness classes and experiences that are designed to involve and impact you. So, what we're seeing is just wellness is taking up more real estate on smart TVs, which now have, you can bake wellness as a channel like Samsung did. They created Samsung Health. It's right on your screen. You can take 5,000 classes of the trendiest boutique fitness and meditation brands, right from your screen for free if you own the TV. And then we're seeing, just amazing things. So wellness companies are becoming the drivers of content for new TV production. So we saw the two big meditation apps, Calm and Headspace, who are flush with funds after the pandemic, scored major television shows this year, one on HBO and one on Netflix, where they're bringing their meditation experience, combining it with visuals and immersive visuals and animation and music, right to people's televisions. But I mean, if you think about the idea of a meditation app getting a television show, this is unthinkable 2 years ago. I mean, there's so much going on. And what's happened is streaming media opens up all kinds of channels. So the Netflixes and Amazons, but there's all kinds of channels. And so the move to streaming media means there's a lot more space and all kinds of new formats for wellness. So what the future is, and what is happening right before our eyes, are companies like Apple and Samsung and Amazon, connecting health wearables to television. So in other words, the experiences will become hyper personalized. So you'll have coaching on your television as you do experiences. So they're taking all these seamless devices that are all seamlessly connected now. And so the future of wellness on television is a really hyper personalized experience. And obviously we say in the trend, I'm sure wellness purists are like, oh my God, no, Hollywood, it has to be inauthentic. It has to be bad. But I mean, this is a story of reach. I mean, you can reach billions of people through these television channels and through these music platforms that are bringing so much more wellness content, right to people's devices and televisions. And I mean, it's sort of hard to imagine. We all want wellness for all. It's kind of hard to imagine a true revolution in bringing more wellness to people without mass media being involved. So I think we have to kind of table the skepticism and hypocrisy. And we also have to realize there's opportunities here for the wellness industry. I mean, I was thinking while I was writing the trends this year, God, this industry has really become two industries. On the one side, there's big tech and big media, and they are doing a lot and they have big money. And they're doing a lot with wellness. And then we have what we think of as the authentic industry over here, which is the independent practitioners, the smaller wellness companies. These people don't know what each other are doing sometimes. So this trend was to get to understand the kind of collaborations that could take place, the kind of content that could take place. And I was thinking about it, wellness is all about programming, and so is television. And there's just, the future is more wellness experts and companies driving more media, what they call, wellness media. And this is really growing from China to India to the United States. And there's just so many interesting things going on. And the music space is just fascinating. That's more mature. There's more going on with bringing wellness, creating wellness and consuming wellness music designed to help you sleep, to de-stress, to focus.
And you wrote about that last year, right? Wasn't that one of the trends last year, Beth?
Yeah, I wrote about it in 2019, but the amazing thing is that it seemed a little nascent then. And in the course of the last year and a half, it's just really taking off. There's all these studies that music was the most important wellness lifeline for people during the pandemic, that the consumption of music doubled. Spotify saw that its wellness music channels doubled. So there's like a paradigm shift happening in the music industry. And what's happening is that people are demanding music, a certain kind of music that affects them emotionally the way they need to be affected emotionally, to focus, to de-stress, to sleep, at exactly the time they need it. So there's all kinds of interesting technologies that are using biometrics to create these soundscapes that are really based on your body and your mind, that you carry with you all the time. So the music space, I really encourage people to read that trend because it's moving.
Yeah, yeah, incredible. And that was 2 reports ago or 1 report ago. And it is amazing how those things, there's like a through line in some of those things, just growing and growing and growing, which is incredible to see. The report that just came out really does look at the impact of COVID on various things. I mean, it impacted everything in the world, and certainly influenced to some extent how some of the trends were put together and written. Can you just give us a quick thought or two on the other trends that are part of the report?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say one, I mean, I think this will relate to the
Sure.
financial trend and the money trend, but also the bringing color to wellness trend. I mean, I think what's really fascinating and huge that's happening in the wellness space right now is that it's the space where the big human things and the tougher pain points are getting solved. So wellness is becoming this hugely expanding umbrella and a huge opportunity. So if needs are not being met somewhere, wellness is now the petri dish where things are being innovated and experimented. So just a few examples, the limits of traditional mental health, the psychiatry therapy model, the difficulty of access and affordability. So then we have this huge space in mental wellness, whether it's meditation apps, all kinds of new solutions. I mentioned before, as traditional religion shrunk, I mean, the opportunities, spirituality now lives for so many people in the wellness column.
Yeah.
So the seeking of deeper meaning and consciousness, I mean, this is all taking place under the column. The death and dying industry that we wrote about 2 years ago, being completely transformed. It was broken, by wellness concepts, women's sexual health and femtech and reproductive, women's needs not being met for their bodies and their sexualities. Now this massive space. I mean, we did sexual wellness as a trend like 6 years ago, and everyone was like, what? Now it's the largest, as the Consumer Electronics Show showed, it's one of the largest spaces in technology right now. So I feel like it's becoming this space bigger and bigger and bigger, where if something's broken, like dentistry, now we see a whole new wellness dentist industry. Whatever is broken, wellness is the column that it's being solved in, and it's the space it's being solved in. So I just find this fascinating because
it is fascinating, and it certainly gives everyone on this call and well beyond an awful lot of hope. I mean, I think, in there lies tremendous opportunity for, innovation and problem solving, as you say. To touch on the trends in the report this year, just a sentence or two about each, so we can kind of bring this, together under the umbrella of this year's report.
Well, just under the rubric of tougher pain points, wellness dealing with more taboos and tougher pain points, solving is the money out loud trend, or the rise of financial wellness. So that trend is fascinating. I mean, you talk about anything with anybody, but you'll never talk about money. But now there's this new transparency and openness, and it's breaking open, the financial services markets. So everything from financial therapists, new financial literacy courses, TikTok influencers that have millions and millions of followers, and apps that help with your, saving and transparency. But basically it's new banks, neobanks that are designed for immigrants or for women in Latin America. So that kind of industry of finance and money, which is so cut and dried and so unempathetic, unwarm, and inhuman, is getting a whole new look, and people are demanding it. And money stress and money shame is the number one stressor for humans. It causes all kinds of health problems. So just the innovation in that space is so interesting. But it's really another example of where some of the toughest things. I mean, employees are sharing their salaries with each other, so there's a new hey, get real. Money is something we all deal with. We all have to struggle with, and there's just more tools and transparency and authenticity. And it's the toughest conversation anyone's ever had. And now the lid is being ripped off that.
And talk about, speaking of ripping a lid off and having a difficult, sort of facing a difficult conversation. We talk about the trend that Tonya Callender, one of our research fellows, wrote.
Yes, and I recommend everyone read it. I mean, it's called Bringing More Color to Wellness. I mean, we all know that, there's been a lot of coverage of, new platforms by people of color, wellness platforms online, and communities that are just so amazing. And we saw a lot of, after the Black Lives Matter movement, we saw every kind of company rushing to support, and market that they were, what we're seeing now is that that they've fallen off, that it was temporary, which is very, very disturbing. But this is really an essay from her perspective as a Black, woman that really researches the wellness industry at length, that is a little bit more intense in the sense that she's asking you to wrap your mind around not, the platforms by people of color, for people of color, but to really wrap your mind around the fact that the mainstream wellness industry is by nature, the narrative is defined around the white consumer. Only things that matter to white consumers define wellness. And I think what's so powerful about her account is it's a personal reflection as well as a professional reflection, and the kinds of experiences that she's had, at a wellness resort, getting hotel reservations canceled, her son not being able to walk in nature in the park because he's a person, a Black child, and getting harassed. I mean, the kind of things that we just don't experience unless you experience them are interwoven in a way to show how far we have to go. And the great opportunity, I mean, that's her point, is, I think one thing we try to address in our trends is when there's a disconnect between demographics and what's being met. I mean, in the United States, we're marching towards a non-white majority society. Now, does the wellness world reflect that reality as far as demographics? Does it reflect the needs of Black and brown consumers? No. So that's a population demographic imbalance and disconnect. And, but the companies in wellness, she explains, she drives 35 miles to go to a gym because that gym makes her feel comfortable. They have professionals at the highest level that are African-American. The whole space, the whole vibe, everything is just absolutely great for her. She drives 35 miles to go there. And she talks about the people that just start really thinking about this and hiring at the higher levels, people that are, of other cultures and colors, will be the winners in wellness in the future.
Yeah, one of the most interesting, I think, parts of that trend is that it was expressed so personally that you really get a sense of a personal experience of it, which I think makes it exceptionally powerful. And I would agree, I would urge everybody to read that trend. There are a bunch of questions in the chat and a lot of sharing of links and ideas and a lot of love for you, Beth. Everybody could listen to you forever, as could I. Maybe you should have your own show for sure on Netflix. But one of the things is when this, hopefully this pandemic has an end, do you think these trends, a lot of things born of this time, will still resonate, will still be important?
I think all of the ones we picked on purpose this year will still resonate. I mean, we didn't get to some really obvious, the entertainment trend is really about the fact that, as our lives shrunk to screens, the big winner in the pandemic has been, streaming media. The two big winners are streaming media and wellness. So they're coming together. The screen wellness is not going to go away. It's permanent behavior change. People have gotten over the year, they're really explored classes and experiences, and they like it. It's affordable, it's accessible. We're all working from home. So that's not going anywhere. I also think, we didn't touch on a whole bunch of things like the home. the home, our world shrunk to our homes, the kind of wellness moves in the home that we're going to see that are both functional and, soulful are happening. And we didn't get to talk about Veronica's trend about, spirituality in architecture and how wellness architecture really needs to start moving beyond the functional and, really start exploring, sort of design an architecture that can move our souls, that is a spiritual experience of the built environment. And I will say, every year, it doesn't matter what it is, whatever trend resonates around spirituality and consciousness is always the most popular one. And it's not something to mock. So people mock it in the media, but
it's very necessary. Yeah.
It's a fervent desire for people.
Yep.
And anyway, so I don't think, the immunity, I hate to say, it's not going anywhere. No doctor will tell you that we're not in for an era of pandemics. I think immune health becomes a permanent pillar of people's health and wellness concerns. I just think it's going to evolve.
Yeah.
So I don't feel any of these. I think medicine and wellness has so much.
Yeah, so much.
So no, I don't think these are temporary.
Beth, I'm going to let you take a sip of water for a minute while I ask, speaking of trends and what's going on everywhere, ask Amir Al-Roy from WellTech One in Israel, sponsor of today's call, a good friend of our organization, a host sponsor of our summit in Tel Aviv. He and his co-founder run WellTech One. That is an innovation hub in Israel, which we know is the startup nation. And I just want Amir to take just a moment and tell us what wellness trends he's seeing in Israel. Amir, if you would unmute and do that.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Beth. Yeah, so Israel, the startup nation, also discovered wellness tech. We are seeing tremendous growth in the wellness technology sector with nutrition, food tech, fitness, mental wellness, telemedicine, and much more being very popular areas in Israel. And of course, we are very excited to welcome everyone to Tel Aviv in November for the first Global Wellness Summit in the Middle East. So we're waiting for you.
Thank you, Amir. And believe me, we are waiting to come. So thank you. And yeah, Amir really has his finger on the pulse of what is happening. Beth, you want to comment on Israel and wellness technology a little?
Yeah, it's funny. We're traveling to Israel, but it's empirically a fact that when I'm researching these trends, it's Israeli companies that keep coming up. So, a very important microbiome company in Israel is Day 2. They're doing amazing things with preventing and managing diabetes using microbiome testing and personalized nutrition, where people don't have to cut carbs or calories. This is saving lives. Everywhere, the breath trend, one of the standout breath tech companies that's coming, interesting. There's so much innovation around breath work and technology. Is another Israeli company, I think, called Anika that's coming, that uses breath and translates it into a vibrational body experience. But anyway, so whenever I think, is it just me because we're going to Israel? But no, there's a lot going on in Israel with wellness technology, and especially around diet and nutrition.
Yeah, yep. And Amir is involved in all of it. We're going to hear a lot about it at the summit, and I'm sure before. Okay, now Beth, this is like asking a parent to choose, their favorite child. But do you have a favorite trend of all time?
Oh my Lord, let's see. No, but when honestly, there's beautiful trends like when Susie picked forest bathing, and it seemed so niche but it actually exploded when you started researching it, and the sort of the kind of simplicity and poeticness, and also it had everything going for it. Medical evidence and a poetic kind of human. That was an extremely interesting. We've been early on trends. I wish we had a dime for the cannabis trends that we wrote, and the mushrooms trend that we wrote, and the sexual wellness trend. All of those, I think the dying well trend meant a lot to me to research and took off in a lot of directions. But yeah, sometimes you're early. But the ones that is, of course, that are gratifying is that when you go to the news every week, you're like, oh, it's really happening, and you see more and more and more directions. And this is what I'm seeing now with this year with the microbiome research. I'm every day I'm seeing a new study that's very interesting about the relationship between chronic disease and the gut and immune health. And just this, it's going to be huge.
Beth, ever had a trend that got away? You know, something you thought that should be included in report, you didn't write about it, and then it exploded into a big trend?
No, I mean, I wanted to write a trend this year on how in 2021, there's going to be a new focus on emotional wellness and new kinds of emotions, so that, you know, the old stress that the industry was dealing with feels lightweight now. I mean, we're seeing trauma, PTSD, severe grief, anger, agoraphobia, loneliness. I mean, we have a mental wellness crisis happening, but mental wellness is always so much about self-optimization and some kind of rah-rah, but this is about addressing raw human emotion. I mean, first of all the trackers are moving towards tracking mood and emotion as the key biometric, so they're on to something. But we're, you know, I'm just so fascinated. Like, I see, like, you know, I was looking at Six Senses yesterday, talking about programming around love and empathy and creating kind of safe and honest spaces, so you have the right practitioners to deal with things like trauma, for people to heal. I mean, they call it emotional hospitality. In Iceland tourism, they created a program where you scream as loud as you can into the wilderness, and then it's taped back to like the country. But I think, and Zappos set up a phone line so you can just call and talk about anything that's on your mind, your emotions, your feelings. So I think that we're going to see, when people go back to wellness destinations and centers, what they need is going to be very different than 2019. And I don't think playing it safe or sort of avoiding taboos is really the future. I just think I know we talk about emotion, but I think there's a new value and a new intensity to emotion, and different kinds of needs and emotions that need to be met by the wellness industry. And I think because of the pandemic, and I think that's the, you know, the near future when people come back.
Beth, what in this crazy world gives you hope? Are you optimistic about things and anything that you could share with us?
Yeah, I mean, personally, you know, I'm more optimistic about the United States right now.
Okay, you can share anything personal, including that you got a cat during all of this time. Yes?
No, I mean, you know, it's a tricky, every week you look at the delays of when this ends and the complications. And I mean, you know, I do think that there's been a sea change in people's value, in a lot of people's values and what matters, and a kind of anti-consumerist movement that I feel is strong. You know, I think we're poised now to realize, you know, to turn towards climate change. I mean, you know, if the pandemic hadn't happened, I think the kind of mindless consumerism that we, you know, and the kind of like, I don't know if it would have been shaken up as much. So I think that there, you know, that there is profound change, and I think that's positive.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned that every morning you get up and you read news for 2 hours. I'm one of those people who went on a kind of hiatus from reading the news for a while. But what kinds of things do you read in the morning?
Well, you know, I mean, I think I meant to say at the beginning that I really just spend the first hour, I have searches on tons of words. I really want to know what's going on in the health and wellness space. So every morning, that's what I do. I want to know the studies. I want to know everything. So I just take that time, and then I save links and save thoughts and save ideas. And I do it again at night. And then I want to read outside. I mean, as I said, you got to think outside the wellness industry if you want to understand the future of it, because the bigger shifts are what are really going to dominate, you know, what happens. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big reader, and I believe that if you want to understand your industry, you got to spend time reading.
Beth, before we do a little lightning round with you, there are a bunch of questions about travel and resetting travel and what's going to happen. I know Elaine Glusack from New York Times wrote that trend for us. You want to just touch on travel for a minute?
Yeah, well, Elaine did a very pragmatic and very, very useful, it's the year of the travel reset. And I mean, obviously, travel came to a near complete halt in 2020.
Yeah.
And it gave, as she points out, it gave suppliers and consumers some time to think about what was wrong with a kind of manic, destructive, unsustainable travel that had been, it's like every year the travel industry grows by X%. And, we see Venice being destroyed by over-tourism and
Right.
I mean, and the kind of sustainability issues. And anyway, so, she says, this has been a time for both destination suppliers and people to kind of rethink travel. And she basically, her thesis, which is really just true, is that when travel comes back, basically all of it will be wellness travel. So travel is moving from the manic to the more mindful. It's more about nature. It's really about purpose. There's a lot of talk about regenerative travel where you leave someplace better off than it was when that's still conceptual, but it's an ideal, a new ideal that people are reaching for. Destinations are going to take rules about over tourism and not let this happen as in many places the same way as before. We need to deal with under tourism. So we need to redistribute travel. But she's talking about slower, more natural, more mindful, more human powered, more purposeful travel. And we also have the other element of it is, this just huge concern for safety. So she calls it tentative travel. So when people start to travel, the kind of guarantees for health and lack of infection become huge. But in a funny way, we talk about wellness travel as a segment, and she's really saying, if you really think about it, all travel when it comes back will be, in a sense, wellness travel.
Well, that is an amazing takeaway for this group, and I think that's exactly right. And her trend really gets into that in a wonderful way, and it's really, really such an important point. People are not going to just be it's going to have purpose and meaning when people start traveling again, because they're going to be very careful about what they do and where they go. We have 1 minute left, Beth, and I'm going to do a lightning round of questions with you, made famous by James Lipton on the Inside the Actors Studio. But I adapted a little bit for each Wellness Masterclass guest. So here goes. What is your favorite wellness word?
Oh my gosh. Famous wellness word.
Favorite?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I'm sorry.
What is your least favorite wellness word?
Trend? No.
What are you binge watching on Netflix?
I just finished The Queen's Gambit, and I was watching a show called Lupin. Yeah.
Okay. Who's your favorite writer?
That's a toughie. I studied the 18th century British novel, so everything from Jane Austen to Samuel Richardson. I'm a big 18th century novel person.
Okay, what job would you have if you didn't have all the ones you currently have?
Well, I studied to be a professor and academic, so I think that would be something I want, although the academic world has just exploded with not nastiness. So I guess I'm happy I'm not, but that's what I was going to be.
And what is your superpower, Beth?
I think that I'm a little obsessional, and I go down, I go a little deep. So, I think maybe I'm, research is probably what I'm best at.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Hi, I'm just so glad I'm there, right?
Okay, thank you, Beth McGroarty, for your time, your thoughts, your insights, your honesty, your humor. Now go back to bed. It's like 8 o'clock in LA. But everybody unmute yourselves. That's something you have to do yourself. And let's give Beth a round of applause and some global love. Beth, gotta come back later in the year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.